On a bitter January morning in 1989, Marcus Webb stood on the shoulder of Interstate 76 near the Pennsylvania-Ohio border and watched his reputation slide down an embankment. 2 hours earlier, a Peterbilt 359 hauling 38,000 pounds of steel coil had hit black ice during a lake-effect snow squall. The rig had jackknifed, crashed through the guardrail, and tumbled 20 feet down into a ravine filled with frozen earth and ice-covered rocks. The trailer was wedged between two massive oak trees. The tractor was buried to its frame rails in packed snow, and the load, 7 coils of cold-rolled steel, each weighing over 5,000 pounds, had shifted forward, pinning the entire rig against the trees like a vise. Marcus owned Webb Heavy Recovery, the biggest towing operation in western Pennsylvania. He had 9 trucks, a 24-hour dispatch center, and contracts with the Pennsylvania State Police. His newest rig, a 1988 Century 9055 twin-boom wrecker with dual 50-ton winches and $225,000 worth of computerized hydraulic recovery equipment, was supposed to be able to handle anything the Pennsylvania Turnpike could throw at it. It couldn't handle this. Marcus had spent the last 90 minutes trying every configuration. He'd extended both booms to maximum reach and tried to lift. The hydraulic pump screamed. The stabilizer jack sank 6 inches into the frozen shoulder. The Peterbilt didn't move. He'd tried winching from multiple angles with both drums working together. The cables stretched. The wrecker's chassis lifted off the ground on one side. The Peterbilt stayed exactly where it was. He'd called in a second heavy wrecker, another twin-boom unit with 40-ton capacity. They'd rigged a compound pull system with both trucks working in tandem. One of the winch cables snapped with a sound like a cannon shot. The Peterbilt remained wedged between the trees, immovable. Now Marcus stood with his crew foreman, a man named Eddie Kozlowski, and a Pennsylvania State Police sergeant named Bill Patterson, trying to figure out what to do next. "Call Rothman Brothers in Pittsburgh," Eddie suggested. "They've got that new rotator with the 75-ton boom." "That'll cost us $8,000 just to get them here," Marcus said. "Plus whatever they charge for the recovery. We're already into this job for $12,000 in equipment and overtime. If we bring in Rothman, we'll lose money." "What's the alternative?" Sergeant Patterson asked. "That rig's blocking the westbound lanes. We've got traffic backed up for 4 miles. Every hour it sits there costs the state money." Marcus didn't have an answer. His $225,000 wrecker, the pride of his fleet, the truck he'd financed over 10 years and featured in every advertisement, couldn't pull out a jackknife semi. And everyone on this stretch of I-76 was going to know it. That's when the 1951 Autocar U-8144T came rumbling up the shoulder. Let me tell you about Walter Brennan, because you need to understand the man before you can understand what he did. Walter was 71 years old in 1989. He'd been in the recovery business for 46 years, ever since he came back from Europe in 1946 with a Bronze Star and $1,400 in mustering out pay. He'd bought his first wrecker in 1947, a used 1942 Chevrolet with a homemade boom, and started Brennan Recovery out of a rented garage in McKeesport, Pennsylvania. For 42 years, Walter had been the primary recovery operator in the Moan Valley. He'd pulled coal trucks out of strip mines, recovered wrecked cars from river gorges, and salvaged industrial equipment from factory accidents that other operators wouldn't touch. He'd done it all with the same truck, a 1951 Autocar U-8144T heavy wrecker that he'd bought used in 1959. For $500, the Autocar was ancient by 1989 standards. It had a straight-six Cummins diesel that made maybe 180 horsepower on a good day. It had a 5-speed manual transmission with a 4-speed auxiliary. It had no power steering, no air conditioning, no creature comforts of any kind. The cab was exposed to the weather with canvas side curtains. The seat was a spring-mounted bench with a cracked vinyl cover. The paint, originally maroon and cream, had faded to rust brown and yellow. But the Autocar had something that Marcus Webb's $225,000 Century didn't have. It had a Holmes 750 twin-boom wrecker body with a mechanical advantage winch system designed in 1949 by Ernest Holmes Jr., son of the inventor of the modern tow truck, and it was built to do one thing better than any wrecker before or since: pull dead weight out of impossible places using physics instead of hydraulic power. Walter had retired in 1987. He'd sold Brennan Recovery to a younger operator and moved to a small house outside Greensburg, but he'd kept the Autocar. He couldn't bear to part with it. The truck had been his partner for 30 years. It had put his 2 sons through college. It had built his life. When Walter heard about the jackknifed Peterbilt on his CB radio that morning, he'd climbed into the Autocar, fired up the Cummins, and driven the 35 miles to the accident site. Not because anyone had called him, not because he expected to be paid, but because he knew, the way a man knows his own heartbeat, that his 38-year-old wrecker could pull out what the modern trucks couldn't. Marcus Webb watched the Autocar approach with something between confusion and irritation. The truck looked like it belonged in a museum, not on an active recovery site. The boom was a simple twin A-frame design with exposed cable drums. The winches were mechanical, driven by a power takeoff from the main transmission. The whole rig couldn't have weighed more than 18,000 pounds. Walter stopped the Autocar about 60 feet from Marcus's Century. He climbed down slowly, 71-year-old knees protesting the movement, and walked over to where the 3 men stood. "Morning," Walter said. Marcus looked at him, looked at the Autocar, and felt his irritation sharpen into something meaner. "This is an active recovery site," Marcus said. "State contract, insurance liability, you can't be here." "I know," Walter said. "I used to hold that contract myself, before you took it over in '84. Marcus's jaw tightened. He remembered. Walter Brennan had been the recovery operator on this stretch of highway for decades. When Marcus had started his company in 1980, Walter was still the dominant player. Marcus had undercut him on price, offered newer equipment, better response times, and eventually won the state contract. Walter had retired not long after. "So what do you want?" Marcus asked. "I can pull that Peterbilt out," Walter said. For a moment no one spoke. Then Marcus started to laugh. It wasn't a kind laugh. It was the laugh of a man who'd been embarrassed for 2 hours and was looking for someone to take it out on. "You can pull it out," Marcus repeated. "With that?" He pointed at the Autocar. "Yes. That truck's got to be, 40 years old? 38. You think it can do what my 75-ton twin-boom can't?" Walter looked past Marcus at the Century, at the extended booms, at the winch cables hanging slack. He looked down into the ravine at the jackknife Peterbilt. "Your truck's designed for lifting," Walter said. "Mine's designed for pulling. There's a difference." Marcus shook his head, still smiling. "This is adorable, really, but I've got a real problem here and I don't have time for." "You've been at this for 2 hours, Walter interrupted quietly. "You've tried everything you can think of. You're out of options." "What have you got to lose by letting me try?" Marcus looked at Eddie. Eddie shrugged. He looked at Sergeant Patterson. "Him try," Patterson said. "We need that rig moved." Marcus turned back to Walter. "Fine, but when that antique breaks down trying to move 38,000 pounds of steel coil, you're hauling it off this site yourself." Walter nodded. "Fair enough. Me tell you about the Autocar U-8144T because it's important to understand what made this truck different. The Autocar U series was introduced in 1950 as a heavy-duty truck platform designed for construction, logging, and recovery work. The U-8144T variant was specifically built for towing, featuring a reinforced frame, heavy-duty springs, and a specialized wrecker body. Walter's truck was equipped with a Holmes 750 twin-boom system. The Holmes 750 wasn't the most powerful wrecker on the market in terms of raw lifting capacity, but it had something more valuable: a mechanical advantage winch system that used a planetary gear reduction combined with a block and tackle pulley arrangement. Most modern hydraulic wreckers worked by using hydraulic rams to extend booms and hydraulic motors to turn winch drums. They were fast, powerful, and efficient for lifting. But lifting wasn't the same as pulling. When you tried to pull something that was stuck, wedged, or pinned, hydraulic systems hit their limits quickly. The pumps could only generate so much pressure. The motors could only turn so fast, and safety systems would shut everything down before components failed. The Holmes 750 worked differently. It used mechanical advantage, the same principle Archimedes described 2,000 years ago. The winch drums were connected to the truck's power takeoff through a series of planetary gears that multiplied the pulling force at the cost of speed. Then, by running the cables through external snatch blocks, heavy steel pulleys, you could double, triple, or quadruple the mechanical advantage again. The result was a system that pulled slowly, relentlessly, and with enormous force. It didn't have safety cutoffs. It didn't have pressure limits. It just pulled until the job was done or something broke. And Walter Brennan knew exactly how to rig it so nothing broke. Walter spent the first 40 minutes doing what Marcus hadn't done, studying the problem. He climbed down into the ravine, wading through snow up to his waist. He examined the Peterbilt from every angle, noting how the trailer was wedged against the trees, how the load had shifted, where the weight was concentrated. He pushed a steel probe into the snow around the rig to gauge how deep it was buried and what kind of ground was underneath. Marcus watched from the roadway, arms crossed, impatience written across his face. Eddie and Sergeant Patterson watched too, but they were quieter, more curious. When Walter climbed back up to the road, he walked over to the autocar and began unloading equipment. Not hydraulic tools, not power equipment, just simple old-fashioned gear. 4 massive steel snatch blocks, lengths of heavy chain, wooden cribbing timbers, and a canvas bag filled with shackles and connecting hardware. "What is all that?" Marcus asked. "Mechanical advantage," Walter said. He carried 2 snatch blocks down into the ravine. He used one of the wooden timbers to dig through the snow to solid ground, then drove a 4-foot steel anchor stake deep into the frozen earth with a sledgehammer. He attached 1 snatch block to the stake. Then he climbed onto the buried Peterbilt, brushed snow off the trailer frame, and hooked a heavy chain to the strongest connection point he could find. He ran the chain through the first snatch block, then back up to the roadway where he attached the second snatch block to a massive oak tree 40 feet from the edge. Marcus understood what Walter was doing. A snatch block is a pulley. When you run a cable through a pulley and back to your winch, you double your pulling power. When you use 2 snatch blocks in sequence, you quadruple it. When you use 4, which is what Walter was setting up, you multiply your pulling force by 8. "That's going to take forever," Marcus said. "An 8-to-1 mechanical advantage means you're pulling 8 times slower." "Got time," Walter said. He ran the winch cable from the autocar through the pulley system in a complex web. From the winch to the tree, through the first snatch block, down to the stake in the ravine, through the second snatch block, back up to a third block attached to another tree, and finally down to the chain wrapped around the Peterbilt's frame. It looked like something out of a physics textbook. It looked impossibly complicated. But Walter had rigged systems like this 1,000 times. He climbed into the autocar's cab, engaged the power takeoff, and activated the winch. The cable went taut. The snatch blocks creaked. For a long moment, nothing seemed to happen. Then the snow around the Peterbilt's trailer began to shift, not much, just a slight movement, but Marcus saw it. Eddie saw it. Sergeant Patterson saw it. Walter kept the winch turning. The autocar's Cummins diesel chugged steadily, the planetary gears doing their work, multiplying the force 8 times over. The cable hummed with tension but didn't snap. The snatch blocks held. The trees groaned but didn't uproot. And the Peterbilt moved 6 inches, then a foot, then 2 feet. The crowd that had gathered, state police, tow truck operators, truckers waiting in the backup, went silent. Walter kept winching. The autocar's winch drum turned at maybe 1 rotation every 4 seconds. At that speed, it would take 30 minutes to pull the Peterbilt 50 feet. Walter didn't care. He just kept pulling. The trailer came up first, dragging through the snow. Then the tractor. The steel coils in the trailer shifted with a metallic groan. The whole rig was moving now, climbing out of the ravine at an angle, the autocar's winch dragging it inch by inch back toward the roadway. Marcus Webb stood absolutely still. His mouth was slightly open. His arms had fallen to his sides. He was watching a 38-year-old wrecker with a 180-horsepower engine do what his $225,000 truck with computerized hydraulics and twin 50-ton booms couldn't do. 28 minutes after Walter started winching, the Peterbilt was back on level ground. The trailer was still angled. The load was still shifted. But the rig was out of the ravine, on solid earth, and ready to be straightened out and towed away. Walter shut off the winch, climbed down from the autocar, and began disconnecting his rigging. The crowd erupted. Truckers were honking their horns. The state police officers were clapping. Someone in the traffic backup was shouting, "Old school wins." Marcus Webb walked slowly down to where Walter was coiling his cable. "How?" Marcus said. It wasn't really a question. It was the only word he could get out. Walter looked up. "Same way I've been doing it for 40 years. Mechanical advantage, physics, patience." "My twin boom, your twin boom lifts," Walter said. "It's designed to pick things up off the ground, but that Peterbilt wasn't sitting on the ground. It was wedged between trees and buried in snow. You can't lift something that's stuck from 3 directions. You have to pull it." He nodded toward the autocar. "That winch was designed in 1949 to pull dead weight out of impossible places. It doesn't know when to quit. It just keeps pulling until the job's done or something breaks, and I know how to rig it so nothing breaks." Marcus was quiet for a long time. Then he said something he hadn't said in years. "I need to hire you," Walter smiled. "I'm retired. Pay you as a consultant. Teach my crews how to do what you just did. Come out on the jobs we can't handle. I'm 71 years old. I don't need the money." "Then teach me," Marcus said. "Because I just spent 2 hours making a fool of myself with equipment that cost more than most people's houses. And you fixed it in half an hour with a truck you bought for $500. Walter looked at Marcus for a long moment. Then he looked past him at the Century, at the expensive hydraulics, at the computerized controls. "You want to know the difference between your truck and mine?" Walter said. "Yes. Yours is built to impress customers. Mine is built to work. Yours has 50 tons of lifting capacity and a dozen safety systems that shut it down if anything goes wrong. Mine has mechanical winches and no safety systems at all. It just pulls until I tell it to stop." He paused. "You can buy all the technology you want, Marcus, but if you don't understand the physics, if you don't know how to rig a pull, how to use mechanical advantage, how to read the ground and the load, all that technology won't help you. I learned this trade from men who did it before hydraulics existed. They taught me that the tool doesn't matter as much as knowing how to use it." Marcus nodded slowly. "Will you teach me?" "Come by my place next Tuesday," Walter said. "Bring a notebook. Me tell you what happened over the next 4 years, because this story doesn't end on the side of Interstate 76. Marcus Webb went to Walter Brennan's house the following Tuesday. He brought a notebook, like Walter had told him to, and he spent 7 hours learning about mechanical advantage, rigging angles, load distribution, and the physics of recovery. He came back the next week, and the week after that. For 4 months, Marcus drove out to Walter's house every Tuesday and learned from a 71-year-old man who'd been doing this work since before Marcus was born. Walter didn't just teach him techniques. He taught him humility. He taught him to look at every recovery as a physics problem, not a demonstration of equipment. He taught him that the newest truck wasn't always the best truck, and that sometimes the old ways worked better because they'd been refined over decades of hard use. Marcus started applying what he learned. When Webb Heavy Recovery got called to a job, Marcus would stop and study it first. He'd rig mechanical advantage systems instead of just hooking up his hydraulic booms and pulling. He'd use snatch blocks and chains and carefully calculated angles. His recovery rate improved. Jobs that used to take hours started taking minutes. Equipment that used to fail started working. And word spread. By 1993, Webb Heavy Recovery had the best reputation in western Pennsylvania. Not because Marcus had the newest trucks, though he did, but because he had the knowledge to use them correctly. In 1991, Marcus bought the 1951 Autocar from Walter. Not to replace his modern fleet, but to add to it. He restored it completely, rebuilt the Cummins, overhauled the home's 750 winch system, repainted it in Walter's original maroon and cream, and put Brennan Memorial on the door. He used that autocar for special jobs. The ones where modern equipment didn't work. The ones where patience and rigging mattered more than hydraulic power. And every time he used it, Marcus thought about Walter Brennan and the lesson he'd learned on a frozen January morning in 1989. that experience beats technology, that knowledge beats money, and that the oldest tool in the box is sometimes the best. Walter Brennan died in 1998 at the age of 80. His funeral was held at St. Mary's Church in McKeesport, and over 400 people came. Tow operators, truckers, state police officers, people he'd helped decades ago. Marcus Webb gave the eulogy. At the burial, Marcus had the 1951 Autocar parked at the edge of the cemetery. Its winch cable was extended, attached to nothing, just stretched out across the grass. A symbol of a man who'd spent his life pulling people out of impossible situations. After the funeral, Marcus drove the autocar back to his shop. He parked it in a place of honor under lights in the center of the main bay. And above it, he mounted a plaque that read, Walter Brennan, 1918-1998. He taught us that the newest tool isn't always the best tool. Sometimes the old ways work better. Sometimes experience matters more than technology. And sometimes a $500 wrecker can do what $225,000 worth of equipment can't. Me tell you one last thing, because it happened in 2007, and it's the reason this story is still being told. Marcus Webb was 62 years old and thinking about retirement. His son Jason was running most of the day-to-day operations at Webb Heavy Recovery. Marcus still came to the shop, still went out on complicated jobs, but he was slowing down. One afternoon, Jason called him. Dad, we've got a problem. There's a coal truck off Route 22 down a hillside. The driver's okay, but the truck's carrying 50 tons of bituminous and it's wedged between rocks. I've tried 4 different rigs. Nothing's working. Marcus drove out to the site. It was almost identical to the job in 1989, a heavy truck in an impossible position, modern equipment failing, frustration mounting. Marcus looked at the coal truck. He looked at Jason's hydraulic rotator. He looked at the rigging Jason had tried, then he smiled. Get the autocar, he said. 51 autocar. Dad, that thing's 56 years old. I know, go get it. Jason brought the 1951 autocar to the site. Marcus climbed into the cab. 71 years old now, the same age Walter had been in 1989, and spent 50 minutes rigging a mechanical advantage system just like Walter had taught him. Then he winched that coal truck out of the hillside in 22 minutes while a crowd of state police officers and passing truckers watched in silence. When it was over, Jason walked up to his father and said exactly what Marcus had said to Walter 18 years earlier. Teach me. The 1951 Autocar U-8144T is still in service. It's been maintained, rebuilt, and restored 4 times. The Cummins has been replaced twice. The Holmes 750 winch has been overhauled 5 times. But the frame, the boom, the mechanical advantage system, the heart of what made it special, is all original from 1951. It sits in the Webb Heavy Recovery Garage in Greensburg, Pennsylvania, under lights, with Walter Brennan's name still painted on the door. And when a job comes in that modern equipment can't handle, when a truck is wedged in a ravine or buried in snow or stuck in a position that defeats hydraulics and computers, someone walks over to that autocar, fires up the Cummins, and proves once again that the old ways still work. Because tow bosses still laugh at old equipment. Engineers still trust technology over experience. And every few years, someone has to learn the same lesson Marcus Webb learned in 1989. The newest tool isn't always the best tool. Sometimes a $500 wrecker can change everything. You just have to know how to use it. Clipboard title plus DESCRIPTIONTITLE. The tow boss laughed at his $501,951 autocar wrecker. What he found under the boom changed everything. Description. In January 1989, Marcus Webb owned the biggest towing company in western Pennsylvania. His $225,000 Century twin-boom wrecker with computerized hydraulics was supposed to handle anything. But when a jackknifed Peterbilt buried itself in a frozen ravine on I-76, his $1 million fleet couldn't move it an inch. Then a 71-year-old retired tow operator named Walter Brennan showed up with a 1951 Autocar U-8144T he'd bought for $500 in 1959. The truck looked like it belonged in a scrapyard. Marcus laughed. The whole crew laughed. 28 minutes later, nobody was laughing. This is the story of how an ancient wrecker with a mechanical advantage winch designed in 1949 did what modern technology couldn't. It's about physics versus hydraulic power, experience versus arrogance, and a lesson in humility that cost one man his pride and gave him something far more valuable. Sometimes the old ways work better. Sometimes experience beats money. And sometimes a $500 truck teaches you more than a $225,001 ever could.